All righty, here we are. Welcome. Welcome to another edition of At the Mic. I'm your host, Keith Malinak. This is part three. We're going to try again because last Saturday, we had some issues with Ed's connection there with the electricity being out. So many have been suffering from the cold and all of the hazards involved with that. We're going to find out today if it's natural or if there's something sinister going on here. Because Ed is speaking truth about Walt Disney history and the history of the Disney company. And so we'll find out if he stays online. But he is with us right now. I want to make that clear. So hopefully it's a little bit warmer where you are than it was this time last week, as the nation was plunged into the depths of the of Arctic, the polar vortex, they call it. So anyway, hopefully things are better where you're at today. I want to show you programming note there at the bottom. Coming up, well, let's see here. Oh, shoot. You know what? Let me hide that because I messed that up. I was trying to do that right before we went on here. And in fact, right now is Saturday, January 20th. I could have taken that off of there. Anyway, but I want you to know we've got some things coming up here. So it's not saving. Anyway, whatever. Obviously, today is January 20th. You don't need me to tell you that. Disney History Part 3 with Ed McCray. Coming up on Friday, we're going to do the Friday live stream. That's at 2 p.m. Eastern with Hillary Kennedy and Chris Cruz, two of my coworkers over at The Blaze, where my day job is with Pat Gray Unleashed. So that will be where we're going to hang out. Who's going to be hanging out with us on Friday? Then Saturday, a week from today, we're going to do Part 4 with Ed. And then we've got the live stream on February 2nd, 2 p.m. Eastern, Brad Staggs, Steve Baker, and then Disney Part 5. I can count that far. Will be the following Saturday. So the next 3 Saturdays, Ed and I have lined up. Boom, boom, boom. Parts 3, 4, and 5. He's got so much information to share. And we're so grateful for your interest, and I'm grateful for Ed's knowledge. He has got so much that he offers us, and I just love it, man.
It's
and
stuff Disney doesn't want you to see.
That's right. And I'm not the only one that appreciates all of your knowledge. So thank you so much for sharing it with us, Ed. You are what was it again? It was the
Encyclopedia. And you
yeah.
said I was the David Barton of animation or something like
That's
that.
right. Yeah, you're the yeah. That's exactly what you are. So anyway, thank you so much for making time. I'm glad to see that you have electricity and heat, and that you're able to join us here today. So where do you want to begin with part 3, my friend?
We're going to start with Walt passing away, but the whole thing of these first 5 shows, it's pretty much about Walt had a worldview. And everything that he made filtered through Walt. So he was the filter. So everything got approved by Walt, all that. When Eisner came into power, they started to erode that moral compass, and nothing was filtering through one man like that. And now the wokeness has filled that void. And that's pretty much what this whole thing is about, these first 5.
So it's fair, I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's fair to say maybe that Walt had this patriotic, pro-God vision.
Yeah.
Then when he passed away, we get into the Michael Eisner politically correct phase of Disney.
It took 18 years to get there, and they don't talk about these 18 years, and we're going to talk about them.
Okay, and so we go from God in America to political correctness and to the woke insanity of today. I look forward to the ride that you're going to take us on. Wow. So I'm going to duck out here. I'm going to obviously be here, but I want you to have the stage here, and I'm going to do my best, since I'm so uncoordinated of keeping me on the screen and putting pictures up. I'm going to duck out, and then hopefully I guess right and pick the supporting artwork that goes along with your presentation. But Ed McCray, take the stage here and tell us all about Disney history, part 3.
Well, how it started when Walt passed away. He didn't know he was going to pass away. He went in for a checkup, and they found a cancerous lump on his lung, and he went back, and they ended up taking the lung out, and then he went back to the studio, and this is where they always talk about it was the last time he ever went to the studio, and people looking back said that he said goodbye to everybody, but he didn't know he was going to die at that point. And the last time he saw, this will be important, last time he saw Chuck Jones, from Looney Tunes, Chuck Jones was talking to him, and he said, you probably don't remember this, but back when the Three Little Pigs came out, I sent you a fan letter, and you wrote back, and I carried it in my wallet and showed everybody for years. And Walt said, I remember, of course I remember that. You were the only animator who ever wrote me. And they talked about Walt was setting up a animation school, and we'll come back to that. So when Walt went back to the studio after he'd been in the hospital, everybody thought he was going to be fine. They didn't know he was there for cancer. They thought it was because he had a polo injury that was getting worked on. And he had a relapse, and he went back to the hospital, and it even looked like the day before he died, he was going to be fine. And he passed away, and it was like Kennedy dying, all that. It was nobody thought he was going to die like that. And
I had no idea that they had misdiagnosed a polo injury. That is
no. They told everyone it was a polo injury, but that's not what they didn't want people to know he had cancer.
I got you.
Roy, his brother, even tried to cover that up because if Walt Disney died, they're afraid the stock was going to go down. All the people would lose their jobs.
Wow.
So he had to kind of strong arm the doctor into telling him what was wrong with his brother. And the hospital's across the street from the studio. So when Walt could look out his window and see the studio. So Roy had all the lights on all the time, make sure it looks like everybody's working and busy and everything. And there's Walt and Roy right there. And people don't see Roy, because he was the guy behind the scenes. He was the money man. And when Walt died, Roy took it the hardest because he was 7 years older than Walt, the older brother. He always took care of everything that Walt did. He was going to retire, and he decided he couldn't retire. He had to finish the things that Walt had started.
Right.
Now, people always ask if Walt is frozen.
Oh no! Okay. All right. So you got the skinny on that, huh?
He is not. They did not freeze Walt Disney. Where that started was animator Ward Kimball. He was a rascal. He would always tell this story where he said that people always ask him if they froze Walt, and he would say, well, I don't know, but one thing's for sure, if they thaw him out, there's going to be hell to pay. And this was in the 70s he said this. So think what it would be like now.
My goodness.
And Ward would tell stories you can't go by anything. He was like in the 70s he showed up at MUFON where they do the UFO conference. And he did the Man in Space shows for Walt in the 50s that they ended up doing a space program with. So he goes to MUFON, and Ward's up there on stage. He starts telling the story about how they were going to do a 4th episode where the government was going to disclose bodies of aliens on the Disneyland TV show. And he tells this thing like it's, and he told it to several people afterwards, but the story kept getting more elaborate each time. So you don't know if it really happened or not.
Wow, that's okay.
But
yeah, go ahead. A real quick question though. Roy Disney, how old was he? Do you know when he had to take over the company?
He was in his 70s. I don't know offhand. I know he was 7 years older than Walt.
Okay.
So Walt would have been 65 when he died, or 66. He just turned 66, something like that. Man. So, and Roy was looking forward to finally retiring, and see what there was no successor when Walt died. They had that's Roy Jr. That's his son.
Oh, that's his son. Shoot. Yeah. See, I knew I was going to screw this up.
That's okay. That's okay. He was there at the time. He was there since the 50s.
Oh yeah, I did. I clicked on the wrong one. There it is. I thought, man, he lost his hair fast. But there we go. Okay, so here's the one I meant to put up there. Boom. See,
there was no successor to when Walt died. So what Roy did was he took all the experts in each department. And they made a committee, and they decided they were going to filter the films all through this committee, and everybody checked the films. But it didn't work out that way. It watered things down. The only one that was a success like that was The Love Bug, and that was a lot of this stuff where they were films that Walt had started, but they didn't get to. The film that was the last film that they credit him as being involved in was The Happiest Millionaire. And that was the follow-up to Mary Poppins, because it was a musical. It was 2.5 hours, 3 hours, something like that. It's based on a true story, but it starred Fred MacMurray, and whenever Walt cast Fred MacMurray in a film, that's because he saw himself in that role. It was like Hitchcock with Robert Redford, and
I didn't realize that one either.
Yeah, he always and we'll have to talk about another time. But Hitchcock wanted to make a film at Disneyland.
Oh, wow. Okay. I look forward to that story. And by the way, before I forget, thank you so much for those of you in the comments and watching here. If you have questions, if there's something that is presented that maybe you have a follow-up question or something, please put it in the chat and we'll do our best. Hopefully we see it. And Ed is happy to oblige. So anyhow, continue.
Happy to oblige. Yeah. So there's the films that were finished when Walt was alive that they start to space them out to release them because Walt's hand was involved in them. And a lot of them were kind of mediocre successes. And another one that he saw himself in was the Gnome Mobile. And that was it was a story about a grandfather and his grandchildren. This is when Walt was a grandfather. He'd always put ties in with his family into these films, a lot of them. And that's what, like I said, everything filtered through Walt. And there was a lot of film projects that Walt bought the rights to. And this is what they were making in the 70s. They were still mining all of these projects that he didn't get to make, but he had the rights to make them. Then, because Walt wasn't around, you had everybody kind of got their own little kingdoms within the kingdom set up. And one of the things that happened was they had the educational short department. They did those. They started those after World War II. And one of the they show these films in schools. And one of the most infamous ones, because of the title, it's called The Story of Menstruation. It's about a girl becoming a woman. And they did ones with the characters, like the last short that Walt oversaw himself was called Scrooge, McDuck, and Money. So a couple of years after Walt dies, they team up with the Population Control Council, and they make a short about family planning geared to South Americans with Donald Duck.
Let me thank you. Let me point out that you sent the Scrooge McDuck. It's about 15-minute long video. You sent that to me. My oldest daughter and I watched that last weekend, and him talking about capitalism and praising capitalism for 15 minutes. I can't imagine Disney. Of course, the irony is, of course, lost on them. How capitalism really helped them tremendously over the years.
Yeah.
But I will say that it's an excellent resource. We'll have to post that in the description here when we're done. But if you have 15 minutes and you have a child that you want to just give a thumbnail sketch of the benefits of capitalism, and you want a cartoon character that is awesome, Scrooge McDuck.
That was the first time he was animated too.
Oh wow, very cool. I didn't realize that the duck had that much gold. But boy,
he's the richest duck in the world. That's
richest duck. I mean, that's safe. Is
even how that started. That he came out of the comic books, and how that started was they did a Christmas comic, and they had to have a rich uncle for Donald, so they named him Scrooge McDuck. Then the character got so popular, they just kept doing more and more stories with him, and they added this whole mythos. And now he's pretty much the most popular Disney comic book character. I think he just had an anniversary. I think he was done in 1947. I think was the first story, and they even have a biography about Uncle Scrooge. Now, when because they would put all these little facts about his life in the comics. Well, in the 90s, somebody went and they took all those facts and they made a story out of them. But now when they reprint them, 2 or 3 of the stories aren't included because of the woke stuff.
Oh, gosh. Okay. All right. Continue. Sorry for the sidetrack there.
That's fine.
I love Scrooge McDuck.
he's one of my favorites. Yeah. I love that DuckTales cartoon.
Yes.
Yeah.
So true. When did he become angry though? Because he wasn't this bitter, angry duck in that capitalism cartoon.
They changed that. I didn't see the new one they did with DuckTales, but they did a lot of references on the modern comics on that one. But they in the 70s they started to make him a villain kind of a thing in some of the comics because he was anti-environmentalism and stuff like that.
So weird.
But
okay.
That's one of the few Disney things I still get. They're doing reprints of the Carl Barks original comics, and I've been getting them right along. I think we're into 15 years of printing them so far. They're almost to the end. He did those for like 20 years. and no one knew who he was till the 70s.
I see. All right.
Yeah. But one other short they did with this educational thing. This was the last one because the management cranked down on this. They behind the scenes, under the radar, they did one called VD Attack Plan, and it was made in 1973. It was about STDs. And they had the little STD germs like talking to each other. And when that one got out, they said, we're not doing shorts like this anymore for the educational thing. But these were the progressives were pushing this under the radar, and the management didn't know this was going on. And what happened was the media heard about it, and it was a big scandal. Disney did a sex cartoon. It wasn't really a sex cartoon, but the subject matter. But it was because the progressives were like, well, the kids are going to do that anyway, so let's just make this for them in school. This is when they started doing sex ed in school. And so after
that video on YouTube?
Yes, it was as of this morning.
All right, so that'll be in the description later.
The voice of the head germ was Keane. He was the villain in a lot of the Disney movies. He played Alonzo Hawk in the Absent-Minded Professor films, and he was in Snowball Express. He was a similar character, and he was the Winter Warlock in Santa Claus is Coming to Town.
You did not. Oh, wow, cool. You did not send me a picture of these cartoon characters, did you?
No, I didn't. But
okay, I'm just making sure because I'm scrolling around. I'm looking for STD.
That's one of the things that I remembered in the extra week I had. This wasn't part of it before.
Okay, cool. Gotcha.
So,
all right, man.
Some of the other things that happen after Walt dies, they complete the theme park projects he started. Pirates of the Caribbean, that one was going to open a couple months before he died. Then they focus on the Haunted Mansion. That opened in 68 or 69, I think. And he didn't really have a story set up for that. They just he had like two ideas for it, and they kind of blended them together.
Now, wasn't there a question somebody asked us last week talking about the Haunted Mansion?
Yeah, they wanted to know if that was Brigham Young's hearse, and it was. But a lot of the carriages and stuff they bought for Frontierland as well, those were real carriages from the American West.
So the hearse that carried Brigham Young, that was in front of.
I don't know if it's still there now, but it was. That was the one where they have the invisible horse hooked up to it.
Wow. Okay. Fascinating. Brigham Young, early leader of the Mormon Church. That's wild, man. Okay.
And they also did your favorite, the Country Bear Jamboree.
Yeah, come on.
That was.
Oh, I should wear. You know what? I've got a viewer sent me a Big Al patch that I attached to a winter cap. I'll have to wear that for one of these conversations. I know right where it's at. Yeah.
I saw that they had a Big Al figure.
But you know, I not too long ago I was there, and even right next to because you know how every Pirates of the Caribbean comes to mind. You know how when you exit, you go through a gift shop and it's all pirate themed gifts. Yeah. When you exit the Country Bear Jamboree, there's no merchandise. And then you go to the store right next to it. You look around, you see just a couple of things, but nothing really Country Bear Jamboree. And I asked the employee, and I was like, hey, I'm looking for Big Al or any Country Bear Jamboree. He's like, yeah, we don't have that. And I know it's because of the political correctness.
Well, they claim that it's not a popular ride, but they haven't tore it out yet. They do that with the Lincoln ride, too, because every time they say they're going to pull it out, everyone complains because Walt built that. That was the great moments of Mr. Lincoln.
What was the link? No, I'm not familiar with that.
Well, they did that for the World's Fair. That was the first human audio animatronic, and they
is it at both Disneyland and Disney World?
Disney World, they did a Hall of Presidents.
Yeah, okay. All right. I'm familiar with the Hall of Presidents.
But he was going to do that at Disneyland, but they didn't have the room for it. So they built at Disney World. They were going to do a whole Liberty Street at Disneyland. Mm-hmm. And they didn't have room, but in Florida, they put New Orleans Square, or they did Liberty Square. And that celebrated the founding of America. And that's why he made the film Johnny Tremaine. It was going to tie in with that. You know, look at that. That was like 20 years before they built Disney World almost.
Right.
That's how far ahead he would think. But in the Country Bears, they were built for ski lodges he was going to build. But after Walt died, the environmentalists got in the way and they wouldn't let him build it. So they put the Country Bears into Disneyland.
Wow. Where was that ski resort going to be? I've never heard of that.
It was in the Sierra Mountains. This is where the Sierra Club is. It might even be why they were founded. I didn't look into that. but it was called Mineral King. That's what he was going to call the resort, Mineral King. And he was going to do that because it worked on the Olympics. And the Olympics were up in the mountains. And that got him thinking about doing a ski resort.
Uh-huh.
And that's what I see there's a book about it. I'm going to order that at some point because I don't know a lot about that part of the story. I just know the basics. So they tried to, with Walt dead, they tried to adhere to the ideals of Walt. And this is an example of how strict they were on this. That you ever hear the writer Harlan Ellison? There was a science fiction writer. He did some Star Trek episodes.
They
hired him.
I don't get out much.
They hired him to do the script for the Black Hole. So he was there he got there in the morning. Then at lunch, he's in the commissary and he's making jokes about how they should do a Disney porno films. And he's acting out all the characters. And Roy Sr.'s table was right next to him. And by the time he got back from lunch, Harlan Ellison was fired. He only was there for like 3 or 4 hours. They didn't put up with this stuff back then. Even joking in the comments, even in the 1930s, there was a company that wanted to make a watch with Mickey and Minnie kissing, but they would do this. So Walt thought that looked too much like an X-rated thing. They were pushing into each other, so he canceled that. Gave him the money back.
The first guy you mentioned at the lunch table, whatever, like he was employed for half a day.
Yeah, not even 3 or 4 hours. He's the one that tells this story. So
okay, that's
wild. He's gone now. But I mean, look at the stuff they gets in the films now, and this was just in private, and the management heard about it, and they didn't like that. And as they get away from when Walt died, he had a lot of people that worked for him that were they were considered his favorites. There were Walt's boys and Roy's boys, and Wally Bug, who we mentioned last time, he was supposed to be Tigger in Winnie the Pooh, and they replaced him with Paul Winchell because he was one of Walt's favorites. He cameoed in a lot of the movies too. The last cameo he did though was in The Love Bug. He just did the little bit parts. And the Absent-Minded Professor, he was the guy that was the newscaster when Mr. Hawk's jumping up and down on the shoes. And then The Love Bug, he's the guy. Dean Jones hits his car, and he says, "Are you from L.A. or something?" I think that was the line. That was the last time Wally Bug was in a Disney film. And another one, he was going to have Tommy Steele be Robin Hood. He was in The Happiest Millionaire. He was the butler. And the other ones that got pushed out were the Sherman Brothers that did all the songs. And I think part of that was they had a contract directly with Walt. They didn't work for the studio. They worked directly for Walt. And they had their contract. They could do one film outside of Disney. Walt put that in their contract. And they did Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And that
was not Disney?
That wasn't Disney. But
okay.
They tried to make, when they made that was made by the people that do the James Bond films. Ian Fleming wrote that.
I had no idea.
Wow. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, they tried to make like Mary Poppins. They wanted to have Dick Van Dyke and Julie Andrews, but if you look at that part of Truly Scrumptious, it's kind of like Julie Andrews and Mary Poppins. But there was kind of a hostility that they were seen as traitors for going to do this other film, even though Walt was fine with it. They would have been writing those songs when Walt was alive. He probably heard some of them because they'd be in their office writing them.
Right.
But when the Shermans leave, they're still very talented. And some of the films they made in the 70s, they did. You ever see the Hanna-Barbera Charlotte's Web? Remember the hand-drawn cartoon? That was them. And if that had been fully animated like a Disney film, that would have been like Pinocchio kind of a thing. Because you think about it, it's a story of life and death and friends and all that. A couple others they did in the 70s. The Slipper and the Rose. It's the story of Cinderella, but it's from the prince's point of view. Then they did a couple films about Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer. Those are made for Arthur P. Jacobs, who did the Planet of the Apes films. And they did Snoopy Come Home for Charles Schultz. You never hear them mention that anywhere, the Schultz estate. I don't know why, but if you have the Sherman Brothers writing a song for you or a whole musical, you think that you would brag that up. And to me, that was the last decent Peanuts animated thing they did. It was in that first batch, the Christmas, the Halloween.
Right.
Boy Named Charlie Brown, Snoopy Come Home. And what Roy focuses on after, with all this going on, is Walt was building EPCOT. It was an experimental prototype city of tomorrow, but Roy didn't see how they could get money to do that. So he focused on building Walt Disney World. And the reason they were going to build Walt Disney World is so Walt would get all of these rights to build a city. he made a deal with the governor of Florida that they would put a Disneyland in Florida, and he always said that would be the weenie to drag people to the Epcot. And so that was see, you guys all caught on a couple years ago that that Disney World had all these exclusive rights for having a nuclear power plant and all these things, but nobody ever talked about why they had those rights. It was because Walt was going to build Epcot, and people could actually have lived there if they'd built it that way. Wow. So Roy focuses all of his attention on building Walt Disney World. He's going to retire after they get done with this. And it was only going to be called Disney World when Walt was alive, but Roy decided they had to call it Walt Disney World so everyone knew who his brother was. Now, what's interesting about this is in recent years, they took Walt's name off of Disney. Now it's just Disney. It was Walt Disney Pictures or Walt Disney Productions. And if you look at the films in the last few years, it's changed to just Disney.
Oh, wow. Okay. Hang on a second. You just made me think of something here, and we don't have to address this today. But one thing I've got behind the computer monitor is I've turned this entire wall into, because I'm the least organized person ever. And so it's just one giant cork board. And I was just noticing that at some point, and we don't have to do this today, just mix this into one of your presentations.
Yeah.
We have to talk about when the whole pin collecting thing, and I'm sorry I have ADD obviously, but for example, here's a pin that I really like, and it's Revolutionary War Mickey. And so I've got a few Disney pins. Everybody's got a few Disney pins, right? But I know it became this huge thing, you trade pins and all that stuff. So at some point, whenever it's convenient for you to mix in here, we got to talk about how that became became a thing, because I'm curious as to how that, Beanie Babies for pins,
Well,
anyway.
I'll give you this. The guy that made those, at least he did. He's from around where I live, and we almost made Jill Chill pins.
You almost did what?
Jill Chill pins. My Jill Chill.
Oh yeah, you're a character, man. Yeah.
We almost did that, but so I kind of know a little bit about that. We'll get to that sometime.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, please.
So now when they're building Disney World, Roy's looking forward to. He's going to retire when this is all done. We'll do a whole thing about Disney World, how that was like a modern marvel, how they built all that out in a swamp.
Yeah.
And the story they always tell about Roy with Disney World is when he went down there for one of his meetings when they were going to open it up, that people were all in the costumes, and he sat down on a park bench, and the person dressed as Minnie Mouse came up to him and said that the head guy is going to be here today. You better not just be sitting here on the park bench. And he kind of rolled his eyes at her. And there's a statue. There's a statue of Roy sitting on the park bench that said all the Disney parks in different places. Sometimes it's in front of the castle. Sometimes it's in front of the entrance there, the firehouse. We have a picture of it somewhere.
There it is.
But that's the story of that. That is because of this story where the person dressed as Minnie Mouse told him he better get back to work.
That is hilarious.
And most people won't know that story when they probably don't even know that that's Walt's brother Roy. And that's the companion to the one that's called Partners, with Walt holding hands with Mickey, and he's got his hand up in the air like they're sightseeing.
Oh yeah,
it's on our preview image for next time.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
It's in front of the castle. So shortly after they opened Disney World, Roy passes away. And what's interesting is all of the Disneys died in December, and Roy died on I think the 20th. His wife died several years later on the 19th, and the same thing happened with Walt and his wife. He died on I think the 15th, and then she died on the 16th. Many years later, she'd married again, but it's just kind of one of those weird things. And then Roy Jr. also died in December. That's Roy when they announced that was at the opening of Disney World, the ceremony. We'll link to that on our links.
My gosh. So then Roy Jr., you said, how long after Roy Sr. died did Roy Jr. pass away?
He just died around 2009, I think.
Okay. Oh, okay. Then that's I misunderstood.
Now, you know the one that's in the media, the Abigail Disney that's always out talking against Roy and Walt? Would be his granddaughter. It'd be Roy Jr.'s daughter, but Roy Sr. that we just showed, that's his granddaughter.
Oh,
I don't have a picture of her. Yeah, that's Roy Jr. He's going to be important pretty soon here.
okay.
But I still got to get through the 70s.
Take your time.
Well,
I told you this is going to be chaotic with me trying to figure out which
it's chaotic
picture
too,
to put up.
Nobody's put all this stuff into a book. I had to like drag this out of different places, and I kind of made a timeline.
You're the one. You're going to put it into a book.
I don't know. I don't. There's a lot of.
And it's going to be called Saving Disney History by
Maybe.
Ed McCray, volumes 1 through 12.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing one of the things that benefits the Disney studio is Hollywood closed all the churches that ran the boards that would keep the film companies in line. I don't want to call it. They replaced them with a rating system where the film companies would police themselves. But before that, they had like the Hayes office and all that, and all the scripts would get sent to these offices, and they would tell you if you could put things in a film or not. But that's why films in the before the 60s, all the films could be seen by all ages. And what I think it was kind of a good thing that they had those censorship boards, because it forced the filmmakers to make smarter films because they couldn't show everything. If you notice, they started showing everything. They had more sex, more violence, all that kind of stuff. But the films everybody considers classics, they're all the ones before that. It was like a checks and balances kind of thing.
I do recall when every Disney film was rated G.
Yeah.
I mean,
they benefit from this because
I wonder when that changed. Go ahead.
It changed in the 60s because the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches, they didn't want to pay for office space in California anymore, in Hollywood. So they closed those boards down. And so then the film company, within a couple of years, the first X-rated film comes out. First mainstream porno film. I think that one John Voight was in that won an Oscar. I think that was the first one to win an Oscar that was an X-rated film.
Okay, but I'm saying, when did Disney get away from making G films?
Well, that was in the 80s. We're going to get there too.
Okay. I'll sit back.
No, that's okay. It's good having it like a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So Disney benefits because this rating system starts up, and it's so loose and chaotic what can be in the film, like the Omega Man with Charlton Heston. That's rated PG, but there's nudity in it.
Mm-hmm.
And people trust the Disney brand name because they know they're not going to have anything bad in it for their families or their kids. And the guy that was running the Disney studio at the time, the motto of the studio was, "We may bore you, but we will never shock you." That's how they did the films there. And then
well stated, yeah.
Every time once in a while, they'd have a big budget film. And this one's going to tie in with that Saving Mr. Banks movie. One of the reasons I kind of hate that film, because at the end of this film, they have Walt takes the Concorde over to meet her at her house because he's got to do Mary Poppins. He's has to get the film rights. It's like this most important thing. Well, that wasn't true. He had a backup film all set up. It was Bedknobs and Broomsticks. They did make that film, but they didn't make it the way Walt would have made it. And Bedknobs and Broomsticks was the story of, it was set in World War II. It was about an apprentice witch who she's going to use magic to fight the Nazis. And now who they were going to get for this in the beginning, they wanted for the guy that's sitting on the broom, that was going to be Ron Moody, who was in Oliver. He played Fagin. And Ron Moody turned it down because he was going to be in the film version of Oliver. They were going to film at the same time. He won an Oscar for that. I know that film won a lot of Oscars. And so they got David Tomlinson, who was the dad in Mary Poppins. He was in The Love Bug as well. So when they couldn't get, when they were going to have Ron Moody, they were going to have Julie Andrews as the witch. So you could have ended up with the dad from Mary Poppins with Mary Poppins as the love interest in the film. She turned it down at the last minute. So they got Angela Lansbury.
Uh-huh.
And the whole concept of the film was all the characters find the magic within themselves. Now, I don't even know if you can see this film on Disney Plus anymore because it has Nazis in it. But
that's interesting.
The whole concept of the original version of this film was she was a bad witch because a witch has to hate. And she couldn't hate anybody. But she hated the idea of the Nazis invading England, and that's how she became a good witch. And that's the magic didn't work until then. And they cut this out of the film. And also, when the film came out, it premiered at Radio City Music Hall, and it is available.
Bedknobs and Broomsticks is available on Disney Plus, by the way.
Oh, good.
Okay.
I hope it's the uncut version. They found all this footage that was cut out and they put it back in the 90s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
Sorry.
That's okay. And it still isn't exactly what it would have been, but if they had made it the way it was planned, it probably could have rivaled Mary Poppins, because everybody always sees Mary Poppins as being the crowning jewel of all the things that Walt made. This could have been like that. And it's an okay film. It's not a bad film, but it's not quite up to what Mary Poppins was. And some of the other big films they made back then in the 70s, you'll probably remember some of these: The Apple Dumpling Gang. And there was Escape from Witch Mountain. And there was
Is that my cue? Is that my cue? Are there pictures?
I don't know. I was hoping
Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
I was hoping you might remember them, because you kind of lived through some of this.
Right, yeah.
There was Candle Shoe with Jodie Foster. Jodie Foster was a child actor at Disney, and people don't remember that now. And remember I told that story about Haley Mills, how the other director wanted her to be, Stanley Kubrick wanted her in Lolita, and that was like a film about sexualizing an underage girl, and Walt turned him down. Well, Jodie Foster was in Taxi Driver. She played a child prostitute. So it kind of shows how things changed. They loaned her out for that. Kurt Russell was in a lot of comedies, college comedies. You remember the Computer Wore Tennis Shoes and The Barefoot Executive? He was a child actor at Disney as well.
Okay, yeah.
He met Goldie Hawn on the set of one of the movies he made at Disney. It was called The One and Only Genuine Original Family Band.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Yeah. That one came out after Walt died, but that one's an interesting one too. Another one they did in the 70s. It wasn't successful, but it was a big budget film. It was The Island at the Top of the World, and it was like a Jules Verne kind of story, and they had the True Life Adventure guys make this. And it was directed by Robert Stevenson, who did a lot of the films at Disney. I don't know why no one's ever wrote a book about Robert Stevenson, but if you look at all the films he made, it's all the quintessential ones you think of with Walt Disney. If you added up all of the money revenue, everything that those made, he's got to rival Spielberg and George Lucas and all that, and fantasy films. Because it's just like he did every single one of them except the Shaggy Dog. That was before. But everyone you think of like that, it was him. And with the animated films, they did the Aristocats, Robin Hood, and the Rescuers. Those were all stories that started under Walt. And animation changed in the 70s. You'd had people starting to make pornographic animated films. There's Ralph Bakshi, did Dirty Duck. There was, I can't remember the name. Oh, Coonskin. And you can't even. I don't know if this one's still available or not. And that it's. They did the Uncle Remus stories, but it's all really vulgar and racist. And he had Scatman Crothers sing the title song on that. And it was, I think it was called Coonskin or something, but just like, but
cringe,
that was come out of that Archie Bunker kind of thing where they were confronting everything.
I see.
And what eventually ends up happening is Walt's son-in-law, Ron Miller, he becomes head of the Disney company, Disney Studio.
Oh, okay.
He
and what year are we in again?
It'd be about 78, late 70s, something like that.
Okay. And what was his name?
So, Ron Miller. We do have a picture of him.
We do. We have two pictures of him, ladies and
Well,
gentlemen.
we're going to get back to him too, because we're also going to talk about Walt's school.
Oh, okay.
But he's considered the heir because he's married to Walt's daughter.
I see.
And then that causes friction with Roy Jr. because he's Roy's biological son and sees this as part of his family legacy, and he's just married into the family, and there was a lot of conflict that happened between them, and that leads up into how we got Eisner. Excuse me. So one of the things Walt did, he started an art school. And he was involved with this art school back in the 30s. He didn't start it. It was the Chouinard Institute, but he ended up in the 60s. He got this idea to merge it with the Los Angeles Conservatory of Music. And that's because Chouinard taught all of his animators in the 30s. So there was no animation schools back then. They kind of made it up as they go. He wanted to set up his own animation school to teach the kids to replace the 9 old men, all of his animators.
Oh, the 9 old men. Wait a minute.
Yeah, we have a picture of them too. Just I just thought of that.
There we go. Hold on. There we go. This is fun. This is
we'll do
like
a whole show about him at some point.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, there you go. There's your 9 old men. Boom.
And they were 9 young men when he called them that. He called them that because of the Supreme Court. They were under FDR. They were called the 9 old men.
Yeah.
But they were the core guys that did a lot of the animated films that Walt made. And they end up having an internship program at the studio. After you go to the art school, you got interned by one of these guys. And so some of the people that came through this school in the 70s, they all were important all through the 80s and 90s. And some of them are still around. There was Glen Keane. He animated like Ariel. He was the head animator of The Beast.
Oh, cool.
He was going to direct the film that became Tangled. He did a short with Kobe Bryant, I think, won an Oscar. John Musker, he was the director of Aladdin, Little Mermaid, Treasure Planet, Hercules. Kathy Zielinski, David Proxima, they were head animators. Tim Burton came through here. These are all people that worked at Disney. A lot of people don't know Tim Burton worked at Disney. He was a Disney animator. Cool. Daryl Van Sitters, he worked there for a while. We'll talk a little more about him in a bit. Joe Ranft, he was considered the greatest story guy of his generation. He did worked at Disney and Pixar. All the early Pixar films he worked on till he died. Rob Minkoff, he directed The Lion King. Brad Bird, he did Iron Giant and The Incredibles. He also was one of the people that started The Simpsons. You remember The Simpsons? Bart Simpson is actually my age if you go by when it started.
And 1988?
89.
89, okay.
When the series started. Because he was 9 years old. And I was 9 years old in 89. And a lot of people don't, when that started, there was the characters of Radioactive Man and Krusty the Clown. People don't know this about him anymore. But they were both of them were designed to look like Homer because his hero was his dad. So Krusty was his hero too, but he looked like Homer. They did an episode where Krusty and Homer switched places. And there was Radioactive Man. You don't see him too much anymore. This just came to my mind when I was saying this.
I love it. I love it.
A couple other of them that came through here. I'm going to screw his name up. Jendi Tarkovsky. He did the Hotel Transylvania films. I think he did Ren and Stimpy. Kirk Wise co-directed Beauty and the Beast, Hunchback of Notre Dame. Henry Selick, he does a lot of the stop motion films like Coraline, Nightmare Before Christmas, James the Giant Peach. Mike Giamo, Jerry Reese, Chris Buck, Randy Cartwright, and John Lasseter. There's also other ones. They all came through this school that Walt set up in the first few years. And they
I've never seen a Hunchback of Notre Dame. Shame on me. I heard it's
Notre
good.
Dame.
I'm sorry. I haven't seen that. Is it good?
You probably aren't the only one. It's good for what it is. They were trying to do something experimental in the 90s, and people thought it was just too dark. They kind of advertised as being like a Mardi Gras thing, but it was a serious story. It's not a bad film, and especially compared to what they make now.
We've been Overton windowed in so many ways.
We have. You're going to see. So it Disney, who with the animation studio, who becomes the golden boy of the 70s, is Don Bluth. He started at Disney in the 50s with Sleeping Beauty. He left. He was a Mormon. He went to do one of the retreats where they go overseas to missionary things, and then he came back to Disney, and he came back to work on Robin Hood, and there was this conflict between the CalArts guys and Don Bluth's guys, and what the final straw was is we have a picture of this as well. That there was this little film called The Small One. It was a Christmas film. It's probably the most Christian film they made at Disney because it's about the donkey that takes Mary to Bethlehem. Right. And it was that project was designed to be a training film for all these CalArt guys. Eric Larson, one of the 9 old men, he was going to be the director, and he was going to train everybody under this. And over one weekend, they took the film away from Larson and they gave it to Don Bluth, and he was directing it. And that started this hostility thing going on between.
What year was that?
78. And I've read they've changed it since it was released. There was at the end it ends on the Star of Bethlehem, And in the original version, it's supposed to have been the light from the star shapes into a cross, like foreshadowing where Christ's going to go. And I know another thing they did change was there's a little song with the bankers, and the original lyrics said that they cheat people when they must, and now it's they work a little harder than they must. And I don't know when that changed, but I remember when I was a kid, they would air it, and they would cheat a little harder when they must. Wow. And so
I'm in the process right now here. I'm just I want to check out the end of the small one and see what it shows.
They added more rays of light on it. Is what I've read.
Going to the very end here.
So they do.
I see what you're saying. Here's what it looks like now. This is that scene you're talking about. See that?
Yeah, they added more rays of lights. That's what they're saying.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
But before it was just a cross, is what all the sources say. I would like to find a print of that to verify that. The other big film they do in the 70s with the animation is Pete's Dragon. And
that's my cue.
Yeah. We have a thing of that. Walt bought the rights for that in the 50s. He was going to make it with Moochie, the kid that played Moochie. And you never saw the dragon was in up until they did this 70s version. They kept lobbying for more and more Elliot in the movie. And and if you look at how they advertised Mary Poppins when it came out, it was very similar to that. With the marquee lights and everything. And Don Bluth directs the Elliot animation on that. The Elliot character was designed by Ken Anderson. He was one of the Walt's animators. And he did that before he retired. He was going to retire. He stayed just to do that. And the conflict between the CalArts and the Don Bluth's people that got to the point where Bluth leaves the studio. So that throws everything behind schedule after Pete's Dragon. And another thing that happened around this time was Star Wars came out. So all these CalArts guys, they want to make animated films like Star Wars. And you have the management. They want the college guys earn their place, stay in line, let the older guys do what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And here's a Disney connection to Star Wars that most people won't know because you can't get this film in America. There was a film called One of Our Dinosaurs is Missing. It's one of the banned films because they have white actors playing Chinese spies. And the dinosaur skeleton is in the original Star Wars in the desert when C-3PO and R2-D2 are lost in the desert. You'll see the skeleton there, and it's the skeleton from this movie. And
oh wow, I love that stuff, man.
And that was because it was just a prop that was there at the Shepperton Studios, and it was the last film that Robert Stevenson directed for Disney. Last film Bill Walsh produced for Disney. They were the top guys. And now Disney's in decline after all this. That's what the 70s has been. It's a steady decline. And Ron Miller realizes they got to do something to get more relevant because people are kind of dismissed Disney as a kiddie thing, Mm-hmm. And so he remembers back when Walt was alive, he watched To Kill a Mockingbird. And Walt, when it was done, he said, "I wish I could make films like that, but the public would never stand for it." And so Ron Miller starts trying to do darker films at Disney for more adult films. They do The Black Hole. I talked a little bit about that last time. They do one called Watcher in the Woods. We do have a picture of that if it pops up.
Okay.
It was based on a juvenile novel. And they, even when they do these darker films, they put a Disney happy ending on it. And the original version of Watcher in the Woods had a different ending where the Watcher was a creature from another dimension. It was, now people think about stuff like that, but back then that was so far ahead of its time it confused people. That's Betty Davis. It was her 50th year in film. This was going to tie in with that. So that was a big deal. They got Betty Davis, and they changed this ending because they said it confused people, and they put an ending on where it was more like a horror ending, where it was a ghost or something. And it was delayed for two years, something like that, from when it got released, and that film bombed. Wow. Then they did Something Wicked This Way Comes with Ray Bradbury, and that one was a troubled production too because it's a very dark story. They tore the part of the back lot down to build the town that's in that film. And Ray Bradbury had been friends with Walt, and he always had lunch together all the time. And eventually, Ray Bradbury, he said this was probably one of the best films adaptations of his books that's ever been made.
Oh wow!
Then all these films are like in response to what's going on in the the other studios. Like Superman with Christopher Reeve came out around this time, so Disney comes out with Condor Man, and they had the same special. I don't have a picture of it. They had the because I added this last night. They had the same special effects guys that did Superman do this, and they also start doing co-productions with Paramount. And this is where Ron Miller meets Michael Eisner. They do the Popeye film we touched on, and they did another one called Dragon Slayer. It's like a Lord of the Rings kind of a thing, fantasy film. Neither one of those are successful. And then they set into motion one that's Return to Oz, and it's a live action adaptation of the Oz books. And the director they get is Walter Murch. He was the producer on a lot of Francis Ford Coppola stuff, and he's considered the greatest editor that's ever lived. But this was the only film he ever got to make because I guess it's a real tiny one. Because the film wasn't successful, but it's very much like what the Oz books are. And they do Tron, and what that one's known for is John Lasseter saw some of the computer animation. That's what turned him on to start working with computer animation. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
That was a dark film. It was a dark film.
Yeah.
But it was that. Think about it. That was all analog. How they did that. And what they should have done was they should have had a prologue at the beginning of what Oz looked like before it all was in decay, because everyone was comparing it to the MGM film, and there was nothing to compare it to other than that, because you never saw what it looked like before, because they didn't have that at the beginning.
Let's take a look at that. Hang on, because I vaguely remember that, and yeah, I do remember not liking that.
It's worth seeing for what it is. If there's a throne room scene at the end of that movie, and if we'll have to do a show about just the Oz books sometime. It's the most successful fantasy book series ever. It was the first successful. It went for like 50 years. Wow, people don't know that. It's part of the American story.
Yeah, and what was it? Tron came around. You said right?
Tron, and that.
By the way, can I just say, Tron? Am I the only person that just does not like that at all? I mean, it just
I don't like it either. But that was
pointless.
That was the thing. It was how the effects is what they sold it as, and there'd never been a film like that.
The story was garbage. Yeah. But now you're getting into like an era where I remember seeing this stuff.
Yeah.
As it was happening. But okay. Yeah. Wow.
And
the effects were that was something for the time, right? Yeah.
That's how they sold it. And they didn't. How they did the effects was they printed out all of the film frame by frame, and they would draw the highlights on those costumes.
Oh my gosh! No.
That's how that was done. And then they put it back through the animation process, and that's how they mixed it with the sound. So these were the analog days. Yeah. So people question: is it an animated film or a live action film? Because they used.
What year was that? What year was Tron?
82, I think.
82. Okay, interesting. Okay.
They did another one they did at this time was Baby Secret of the Lost Legend. That's about that dinosaur that lives in Africa, and that became a PG movie because it has natives that are nude in it. There's no picture of that one.
Can I just put National Geographic up? Same thing.
Well, that's how they argued it, but that got rated PG. Some of these films got rated PG because they were so dark. The another one they did was Flight of the Navigator. That came out. That came out under Eisner, but it was started under Ron Miller. And a lot of these.
What year did Eisner take over?
1984.
Wow.
But see, some of these films had, because of post-production, they didn't come out till 85, 86.
Right.
And all these films I've just listed, all these dark films, they're all being remade now by Walt Disney. So it's like even the mediocre films, they have to remake in this woke image now. They can't just let them exist as they were.
Hey, and by the way, I've seen a couple of mentions, not to throw you off here, but America the Beautiful, that was a ride. Are you familiar with that?
There was a ride called America Sings. I haven't heard of one called America the Beautiful.
America the Beautiful. Okay, yeah.
Now that one, Circle Vision, that one I think was at EPCOT. They had Iwerks developed this thing where they had cameras all the way around 360 degrees, and you
Uh-huh.
could walk into the theater and you could look around and it would be like you were there.
Ha! How cool is that? Yeah, that's a good point that CJ makes. Cassette tapes were more fascinating than Tron. That's for sure.
I think that's how they kept the soundtrack for it, is it was on cassette tape.
Uh-huh.
And now Tim Burton and John Lasseter, they were two of the big stars. Everybody saw they were talented, but they clashed with management. So what happened was they got involved with the live action department. There was a guy that was running that protected these animators' jobs, and he was still in with Ron Miller. He was in his good graces. So Tim Burton, while he's there, he makes this short called Vincent. It's stop motion short. Vincent Price narrates about a little boy who wants to be like Vincent Price. And he does this live action short called Frankenweenie. It was supposed to get released with a reissue of Pinocchio, but it was rated PG. So they could put a PG film with a G-rated film, and they asked the ratings board, why is this, what can we change so it's not rated PG? And they said, well, there's nothing you can take out. It's just the tone of it. It's PG. So this is what was going on with him. And he ends up leaving to do Pee Wee Herman's first film, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Pee Wee Herman hired him because he liked what he did on Frankenweenie. And John Lasseter, he starts experimenting with computer animation because of Tron. And they do a test where they have the backgrounds and props CGI and the hand-drawn animation, the characters, that's all hand-drawn. They did a little test of for where the wild things are. We're going to put that in our links. And he also developed the Brave Little Toaster. It was going to be this hybrid where the backgrounds and the props were computer animated and the people were CG or were hand-drawn. And that film ends up getting made, but not with Lasseter. He gets fired after he does his presentation of it because they just didn't know what to do with him. The head of animation at that time was a guy named Ed Hansen, and he fired him after that because they said there was no reason to do computer animation if it wasn't cheaper than hand drawn. And they could have done that all the way back then. But Joe Ranft works on this Brave Little Toaster film, and he goes with it when they end up making it. And that's where he met John Lasseter at this time at Disney. He ends up going with Lasseter on all his films. And he also met Tim Burton, and he did all of Tim Burton's films. There he is. And he does some of the voices in the Pixar films. He was Heimlich the Caterpillar, and he was the little Wheezy the Penguin in Toy Story 2.
Nice.
Yeah, he was going to co-direct Cars, but he died. They used his voice for the fire engine. He was the little crustacean in the fish tank in Finding Nemo. Jock. Yeah. That was him. He's worked on almost every important animated film at Disney and Pixar in the 80s and 90s.
Boy, he died young, huh?
He died in a car accident. He was riding with a bunch of guys in California on the freeway. You know how there's those cliffs are straight down, and they lost control and they went off on the cliff. All 3 or 4 of them in the car died.
45 years old. Yeah, I'm looking him up.
2005, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
God. He died the same year as Joe Grant, he was also at Disney. He was a story guy that started when Walt was alive back in the 30s, and they both died within a few months of each other. They were both considered the greatest storymen that ever were.
So hang on a second. So
I think we did a picture.
Yeah, Joe Ranft is the one who died in the car accident. That was it's going to take me a moment here, but okay. So that was there's so many steps involved getting a picture on there, man. I'll tell you what. So there's the gentleman that died in the car wreck tragically. And then you just mentioned Joe Grant.
Yeah,
so this is him. Joe Grant looks like back in the 50s, maybe.
Oh, it's probably the 30s. He was in charge of all of the story and the model department where they made the models of the characters. That would have been the 40s. He's working on Fantasia.
Okay. So we got that, and then later on in life. Joe Grant.
He comes back around the time of Little Mermaid, and he stays there till he dies. He dies at his drawing board.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, he was 95 when he died.
Wow.
And a lot of the things in the 90s films he put in there. He like the cricket and Mulan, that was his idea. The tree in Pocahontas, he got that in there.
He died in May of 2005, just a few months before the other gentleman did. I mean, what a rough year that was, huh?
Yeah, well, they both went at the same year, and it's just he left Disney in the 50s because it was his idea to do Alice in Wonderland. It wasn't successful, and he had a falling out with Walt. But the films that he had a hand in were all the way up to Lady and the Tramp. And he always got into a fight about that story with the dog in the hat box that Walt gave his wife for Christmas. He said that he did that to his wife, and Walt just stole the idea.
By the way, we need to pause for just a moment here, because earlier I told you would need to be the one to carry the torch to write all this stuff in a big book of Disney history. Connie agrees. It's your calling. You need to do a book. She's willing to help. And see, look at it. See, look, look. You better be watching for communication from her, because that book needs to be made. She's going to be more than one. It's going to be volumes, dude.
She's one of my best Twitter friends. So
cool. I love it.
So, well, when all these people are leaving Disney, another thing that happens is they start video rentals, and this is for the live action films. And I don't, if you remember back in the early 80s when VCRs started up, you would go to where you would buy VCRs, and they would have all the videos there you could rent.
Mm-hmm.
You could rent them right from like a store like Best Buy, but they didn't have Best Buy then. They were those kind of stores. You didn't buy them, you just rented them.
Yep.
And Disney also tries to get into television. They have a couple failed TV series. They're all based on their previous successes. They try to do a Pollyanna series, Zorro and Son, an Apple Dumpling Gang series, a Love Bug series, Escape from Witch Mountain, Absent-Minded Professor. Now, Richard Dreyfuss tried to do a mini series where he was going to play Walt. And you do a voice. You do a voice sometimes on your other show where you sound like Richard Dreyfuss.
What voice is that? Do you know?
You do this voice where you kind of get your voice high like this, and it sounds like Richard Dreyfuss. I can't do it.
I don't know. Well, I really don't know. You'll have to, next time you hear me say that or do
I'll
that.
tell you.
Tell me, because I don't even know what you're saying or what you're referring to. Sorry.
That's okay. I just thought of that when I saw Richard Dreyfuss in my notes. They also try to do a sequel to Mary Poppins, and who they're going to get to be in this is Michael Jackson.
Wait, is he? What? I hesitate to ask what role he's going to play.
He was going to replace Dick Van Dyke. He was going to play. Okay. He was going to play Dick Van Dyke's brother, the Ice Cream Man.
Okay, his brother.
Yeah.
Right, whatever.
And I think he was still black at this point. No, Michael Jackson was in high demand back then. Steven Spielberg was going to do it. Well, this sounds like a crazy idea, but it's true. Spielberg was going to do an adaptation of Peter Pan as a musical with Michael Jackson as Peter Pan. Now,
that doesn't seem like
what we know about him now.
Right,
that would have been creepy, because he would have been an adult man with little kids.
But not good, man.
Well, that project becomes Hook with Robin Williams. They do about 10 years later.
Interesting.
And but that originally was going to be a straight sequel or straight adaptation of Peter Pan, and it becomes a sequel. And that's why all the score on Hook is so well. If you listen to that score, it's like a perfect album. It's because all of the score is based on these songs that they didn't use for this Peter Pan musical.
That's interesting.
And so when Ron Miller has all these bombs, live action bombs, he decides they're going to do a new label, and they call it Touchstone Pictures. Now, Eisner's the one that gets credit for this, but Ron Miller is the one that did this.
Mm-hmm.
The first film they make with Touchstone Pictures is called Splash, with Daryl Hannah and Tom Hanks, John Candy.
Good stuff.
And Ron Howard directs it. This was like the first big film Ron Howard directed.
Right.
And they never give Ron Miller credit for this, but he did this, and if he had stayed, maybe things would have been a little different.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, you have Don Bluth. He puts out his first animated film, The Secret of Nim. He's the only competitor they really have with Disney really has is Don Bluth. And the film Disney puts out with their people, their animation staff, it's the Passing of the Torch film, is The Fox and the Hound. No one remembers that one, but that was their first one.
I loved that movie.
Yeah.
Fox and the Hound? Do we have a picture of that?
I don't know if I did or not. But even that one, that's kind of like about race relations, if you think about it.
Oh, I need to go back and watch that thing.
I haven't seen it in a long time either myself.
I was so young that...
it's about a fox and a hound. It was 81, I think.
Yeah, you're right. Now that I think about it, yeah, I see. Yeah, in 1881, yeah.
And then even they had the owl was played by Pearl Bailey. She was a black actress, and she's the one that taught him to get along. And
I gotta go back and watch that.
Well,
Yeah.
now I do too. I haven't seen it in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And
I just remember loving it.
yeah, and they did. Then after this, they do Mickey's Christmas Carol, and that one was delayed as well because of every Bluth leaving and everything. And a lot of people don't know this. We'll link to a story about this. A lot of the animators started having a revival. They're like a Christian revival, and they start having prayer meetings at lunch at the Disney Studios around the time of around the time of Mickey's Christmas Carol. Okay. What ends up happening with that is when Eisner takes over, the management doesn't like that, and they can't close it down. So what they do is they start making them include different Christian denominations, then different religions. So they start infighting, and then it implodes. And that's what I was told happened to it.
That's interesting. Yeah. Because, you know, in an earlier conversation we had, I forgot if it was, I think it was part 2. You remember how you had us, we had the video of the
opening of Disneyland?
No, we had the manger scene, you know, the live.
Oh, yeah.
So
that was going on around here too.
Mm-hmm. So Eisner takes that out after what year? It was late 80s, right?
Early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. So you can't get an exact date. I'm not an expert on the parks.
Right.
So, and you can't really look up when
it's clear that getting rid of that and getting rid of this was a prayer meeting thing.
Yeah, it was a Bible study.
And this is all naturally. Eisner's doing.
Well, his executives, but he's
okay. Yeah, right. But I mean, under his regime.
Yeah,
that's when this stuff started to get dismantled. I got you.
Yeah,
okay.
They started dismantling it. That's a good term for it. And they also, while Miller's still here, they start the Disney Channel on cable. And they have the film library of all of Walt's stuff. And this is the stuff I grew up with because we were one of the first people that got the cable because of the Disney Channel. And all this stuff was on there. And they stopped putting the weekly show on because they don't want to compete with themselves. So they have Walt's show on reruns. And they also, some of the guys around the studio, this was when Lasseter was still there, they went around filming all of the people that worked with Walt, a lot of them. And they put the show out called the Disney Family Album that would be on the Disney Channel. They do like an episode about Sherman Brothers or an episode about one of the 9 old men. And there were like 20 episodes. We'll link to it. I found a playlist of all of them. But this is where you could see like Hulu was the voice of Donald Duck, and he was a real guy, and what his whole story was. And they were finally getting credit for their. And I wish they would do that now for the people who were there in the 80s and 90s because they're about that age now. And this is interesting too. Who else gets started with Disney is there was a show they did on the Disney Channel called Welcome to Pooh Corner where they had people in costumes and everything, and they had animatronic heads. And who did that was Ken Forsey, and he did that to get the money to put out the Teddy Ruxpin doll. He was one of the first Imagineers at Disney. He left Disney. He worked for Sid and Marty Krofft for a while. Then he got this idea to do full body costumes, and he was going to do this. We've got to do a whole thing about Teddy Ruxpin sometime. It's just so interesting. He took like 25 years to invent this whole Teddy Ruxpin thing. He wrote all these stories. He's going to do like a television show with it, and then he decides, well, I'm going to do a doll. And he puts all these stories into book form, and the doll reads the stories. But he got funding by doing Welcome to Pooh Corner for Disney.
So I would love to know how much money he made off of Teddy Ruxpin, because that was...
He made a lot, and then he went bankrupt. Because they had to grow really fast. There's like a 9-hour series about him on YouTube. It's real. It's really interesting. And he also, Ken Forsey, what he did was... There would be no Nintendo in America in the 80s unless it was for Teddy Ruxpin because they came in through his company. He distributed the Nintendo, the very first Nintendo with Mario and everything, and Duck Hunt.
Yeah, I'm just looking this over real quick.
Yeah.
Oh man, so how did he, and I don't want you to have to go off on a tangent here, but how did he get his money back after blowing all?
He never really did, but he never stopped working. He was always inventing things. He only died a few years ago, and I posted a memoriam when he died, and I got a thank you from his family. That was one of my first Twitter posts ever on my old Twitter account.
Oh my gosh! Wow, Ken Forsey, he died in 2014.
But he was one of the first Imagineers that worked with Walt. He designed the clock that's outside of It's a Small World. He worked on all those rides: Small World, Carousel of Progress, the dinosaurs, the very first things. He did some rides on his own in the 70s. If you get a chance, that's a really interesting documentary to see, this series.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating.
It was fans that put it together, but it's very professionally done. They interviewed all the people that were still around that worked with him and everything. I mean, it's kind of long, but you're not supposed to sit there and binge watch it. Just come back every so often. So the other person that started out on Welcome to Pooh Corner was Paul Fusco. He created Alf. He did some shows for Showtime before that, but they wanted him to compete with Jim Henson. But after he did those specials, he did some puppets on Welcome to Pooh Corner, and that was him. And then he went and did Alf after that, and that's become its own thing.
There was a time when I could actually impersonate Al.
There's Jim Henson. We're going to be getting to him pretty soon.
Oh, okay, my bad. I jumped the gun there.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
I heard him mentioned.
And the Sherman Brothers wrote the songs for Welcome to Pooh Corner, and they also were writing songs for the theme parks at this point. They weren't welcome in the studio. I don't know why you wouldn't want those men writing your songs and musicals.
Yeah,
they're just so talented. They were so talented, so gifted. All their stuff is great. And the only people that recognized them were the theme park people. And they all the songs when Epcot opens, they write all the songs for that. What they end up doing with Epcot is they decide to make it an educational theme park, like a World's Fair kind of thing, instead of a community you can live in. And it's not successful. And that's kind of a struggling thing. And so now we're in around 84. And so Roy Jr. has had this feud with Ron Miller, and he tries to get new ownership because there's people that have seen all these losses that Disney's made, and they're going to try to take over the company and dismantle it. And Ron Miller was talking to Michael Eisner at the same time. Michael Eisner started out as an executive at ABC, and he was head of Paramount Pictures. Jeffrey Katzenberg was his assistant underneath him. And how Roy knew him was he was on the CalArts board. And so was his friend Frank Wells. He was in charge of Warner Brothers. And so Roy gets this coalition together. And we have a picture of all three of them. He gets Frank Wells, Michael Eisner, and then they bring in Jeffrey Katzenberg, and they take over Disney. They get rid of Ron Miller. And Miller he never got over what Roy did to him. And when his wife would talk to Roy about things like the Disney Family Museum, Ron didn't like that.
I'm looking for a picture of him.
I don't remember which one. It's got 3 photos of them together. We're going to be on them throughout here, so it's okay if you don't have it right away.
Okay. And what were the 3 names again?
Michael Eisner, Frank Wells, and Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Okay.
I can't remember whose name was first.
Yeah, I found it here. Okay, cool.
Now Eisner, he's the one that started the Star Trek feature films and the Indiana Jones films, so it's not like he was not talented. And that's Eisner on the left, Frank Wells in the middle, and Katzenberg's on the far right.
Okay.
And they bring him in, and they have to reevaluate the whole company, what they're going to do to turn the ship around. The only area that's profitable has been the theme parks, except Epcot. And the animated film that's going on at that time is The Black Cauldron. That had been in development for like 20 years. And Walt bought the rights to The Black Cauldron because he looked into getting Lord of the Rings, but he was advised you could never make this into an animated feature. So he got this book series, and that The Black Cauldron come out of that. And they merged 5 books into one. And they wanted to make this lavishly produced film, like how Sleeping Beauty was the last film they made like this. It was in widescreen, fully animated, and the film doesn't work. Katzenberg says it's too dark. He goes in and edits some of the film, and people get upset about it. And when it finally gets released, it bombs. And they want to get rid of the animation studio, but Roy said that they can't. He's going to take over animation because he's the only one that knows about it. He's going to shepherd it in. Katzenberg's in charge of all the film production, so he thinks he's in charge of animation as well. So there's kind of a conflict there that starts building. And they kick all the animators out of the studio Walt built with the profits from Snow White. He built it specifically for animation. They want it for office space for the feature films. And they start laying animators off, and they work at other places. There was a film that came out, Alvin and the Chipmunks, in the 80s. Was the Chipmunk Adventure. A lot of these topless guys worked on that, and you would never think they would work on that, but you see and this is why, because they were all laid off at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Andreas Deja, Glen Keane, David Proxima, they all worked on that Chipmunk Adventure, and they tear down the back lot, and that lot's been there for the 50s from Walt making all these live action films. They tear the whole thing down so they can put in parking lots and office space. And they start Walt's show back up again. They have a conflict who's going to host the show, if it's Roy or Eisner, and Eisner ends up hosting it. And during this time, Don Bluth, he's hooked up with Steven Spielberg, who wants to start making animated films, and he makes The American Tail. And that was, at that time, that was the most successful animated film ever made. And it was about a Jewish family of mice leaving Russia, coming to America in 1886, tied in with the 100th anniversary of the Statue of Liberty. Because everybody now thinks of it as a statue of immigration, and it's not. And the character there, the mouse, was named Fievel, and that was named after Spielberg's grandfather. And even that film was dark, and Spielberg edited things out. And if you watch it, the family of the mice, they have a baby. In the original version, the baby dies when they're in America. They cut that out, so the baby just disappears from the story. So
what?
Yeah. And
I mean, you might want to just have a few token scenes where it's in the background, just so it doesn't vanish completely.
It just vanishes. So you're like, what happened to the baby? And
I didn't notice that. I got to go back and watch these things, man.
You got to notice this too, because the guy that was a professor at one of my colleges, or at my college, he did some of this work on this, and he said he did the scene where all the cats go onto the ship at the end of the film. And so he's showing it to us in class, and I'm like, well, why is Fievel's friend is the one that's voiced by Dom DeLuise? He's one of the cats there in the group. And he has him go on the ship to China. And he didn't like that I pointed that out. But
oh, interesting. Huh.
And so, but because of that, Disney does a mouse film too. They do The Great Mouse Detective. Comes out a couple of years after that. It's like Sherlock Holmes with mice. It was originally called Baker Street. Basil Baker Street. And they decided that they don't want to call it that. They want to call it The Great Mouse Detective. They bring in Henry Mancini to write the music. He was a big producer at the time, and that's Vincent Price's character there in the middle. Professor Radigan. Vincent Price said that was his favorite film he was ever in because he got to sing a song. I think he sang 2 songs. And I never bought that was Vincent Price's voice coming out of that design, though, because Vincent Price's voice doesn't look like it would come from that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a decent, successful film. They only made it because they had to pay the animators either way if they were working on a film or not. So they said they might as well work on this film. It started because people were bailing on the Black Cauldron. They wanted to do something else, and they started up this Great Mouse Detective film. And because Eisner was a TV executive, he wanted to start doing television animation. And so that's where you get things like the Disney Afternoon. There was the first thing they did was the Wuzzles, and people don't remember that. It was Saturday morning CBS show.
Hey, hang on a second.
Yeah.
I'm just now noticing, and this is so unprofessional of me. I'm just now noticing all these images, all boom, 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 that I should have had. So this is the original Disney Channel logo.
Yeah, that's
right?
it. That's
incredible. I love it. Oh, hang on a second. Let me get that.
That's what I only consider to be the Disney Channel logo, because that's the logo I grew up with.
That's pretty cool right there. And the animation building that they had to get rid of, right? That is
one of them they've got there. That's the one they build. They build one.
Oh, okay. So that
hat.
Yeah, all right. So that's the new one, right? That was just in recent years.
They named it after Roy. Yeah, now it's called the Roy Disney Building after he died. But that's where they make the films now.
That's cool. And then you just now started to mention Disney Afternoon.
There is a picture of that.
Oh yeah.
All those different shows.
I recognize this. Yeah.
There we go. They start out doing the Wuzzles for the Saturday morning cartoon. It's like 2 different animals mixed into one. Then they do. They have a failed pilot called the Fluffy Dogs. They put that on the Wonderful World of Disney. Then they do the Gummy Bears as a Saturday morning show on NBC. Some of them are there. And then came DuckTales. Well, Gummy Bears, how that started was Eisner was somewhere at a meeting. They had a dish of gummy bears on the table, and he comes back. We got to do a cartoon about gummy bears. And they're like, well, how do you do a show about gummy bears? Because they're the candy. They came up with this medieval show with all these characters. The voice of Tigger, Paul Winchell, he was the magician one there, Zummy. He invented the artificial heart. He was one of the inventors of the artificial heart.
Oh yeah, wow, cool.
He was a ventriloquist in the 50s. He did Jerry Mahoney.
Oh, okay. I can almost get that theme song in my head. I'm right on the.
Well, you know, it's funny. The guy that wrote that theme song.
Yeah.
The guy who wrote that theme song sent me hate mail once because I voted for Trump. He told me we were dangerous and to stay away from him, and I was never near him in the first place. So I don't. That's my gummy bear.
He just randomly reached out to you to tell you that? Or?
I'm pretty well known, or was at that time in Disney circles. I'm the Rush Limbaugh of animation.
Yeah, okay. Public enemy number one, Ed McCray, for his Disney knowledge.
I pretty much get treated that way. So then after Gummy Bears, they do DuckTales. That's on every day. That's based on the Uncle Scrooge cartoons. Then they start adding things like the Rescue Rangers with Chip and Dale. This is how they keep all ththose shorts characters alive. They do Tailspin with the Jungle Book characters. Darkwing Duck.
Yes.
Darkwing Duck. They were doing some comics with Darkwing Duck that were very much in flavor with the show. I know one of the guys that wrote those. They do Goof Troop with Goofy. They do Bonkers. That was supposed to have been a Roger Rabbit one, but we'll get into why that wasn't Roger Rabbit. Then there was the Gargoyles, and that was like to compete with Batman the Animated Series. And that's kind of got a cult following now. But that was the first batch of the Disney Afternoon. And those all started out of the 80s, even though those got released into the 90s, because it takes a long time to make a run of 66 episodes of a show. Yeah. And even though they were done overseas. But that's how they got into television animation. Then they do, there's Roger Rabbit. This is the first successful animated film that starts the whole rise that we're going to go on. And at the time, they didn't think that the younger guys could handle it, so they brought in a director, Richard Williams. He did the only film that was ever nominated for both, won for both an Oscar and an Emmy. They changed the rules after that, so they couldn't do that again. It was a version of A Christmas Carol, and he had Chuck Jones work on it and all this stuff. And he'd also been working on this film called The Thief and the Cobbler. Now, this was Roger Rabbit before he got involved. They were going to do Roger Rabbit under Ron Miller, and Paul Rubens, who was Pee Wee Herman, was the voice of Roger.
Oh, wow.
We'll link to some of this. I've got some of the animation tests.
Wow, yeah.
So most of the Roger Rabbit stuff is animated in England at Richard Williams Studio, and there's not enough animators to finish this film. And if you see this film, it's like a love letter to all those original shorts and films and everything.
Right. It's all over the map. You're trying to follow the references.
Well, with that, I got more out of it when I started looking at like the Popeye cartoons and all the Tex Avery, all the other studios, not just Disney, because it's like a love letter to all that. And they couldn't get enough animators to finish the film. So I'm going to tell you about a scene that was cut from the film because they didn't have enough animators to do it. Wow. They were going to do a funeral for Marvin Acme. You remember Acme got murdered, and that's what started this whole thing. He did all the gags and the Looney Tunes. He gets murdered, and they were going to have a scene where Eddie Valiant there, he gets a clue at the funeral for Marvin Acme. And so who they have giving the eulogy was Foghorn Leghorn. and Foghorn Leghorn, he was based on a character in the 1930s and 40s called Senator Claghorn.
I say,
yeah.
Son.
Yeah. And then they were going to have the pallbearers, and this is where Popeye and Bluto were going to be. And they were going to be Popeye and Bluto, Yosemite Sam, and a couple other characters. And so they say someone makes a comment that they're the pallbearers, and Popeye says, "We're hauling Paul. I thought we were hauling Acme." And then Bluto thinks that's disrespectful. They start having a fist fight. So there's this brawl at the funeral, and Yosemite Sam just gets ticked. He just picks the coffin up and he throws it into the hole. Then they put the dirt on it, and after how they end this scene is Casper the Friendly Ghost comes out of the ground. And he asks, "Would you be my friend?" And everybody goes, "It's a ghost." They all run out of the funeral. I wish this was Spielberg's favorite scene in the whole movie, and they didn't get to do it. And I wish they would have, because I would have liked to have seen Popeye and Bluto and Roger Rabbit.
Sounds hilarious.
It would have been. And somebody sold all the storyboards on eBay. That's how anyone even found out about it. One of the animators.
Oh, wow.
And how it was going to be a Walt Disney Pictures release, but when they screened it for Roy Jr., he said this is not going to be a Disney release because of the joke. Is that a rabbit in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me? And so it became a Touchstone picture release. And this is probably the only time the Song of the South characters are going to be animated again, because they're all in there. Even the Tar Baby's in there. When Eddie Valiant's driving into Toontown, the Tar Baby's sitting there on one of the fences.
Oh, wow. What year was Roger Rabbit?
1988.
Okay.
I still remember the first time I saw it. It was at Thanksgiving at my uncle's house.
Me too, man. Yeah. Okay. Good stuff, man.
And they were going to do a sequel. They did some shorts and everything. But what happened was Spielberg shares the rights to Roger Rabbit, all those characters, with Disney. So that when they start making these shorts, they were supposed to get shared between Amblin and Disney on their films. But Disney keeps putting them on their own films, and Spielberg gets mad. And there's one that was almost finished. He cancels the short after. Well, it cost Disney money that they made this whole short. And they can't show it. Mm-hmm. It was called Hair in My Soup, is what it was called. So eventually they pull the plug on that. No more Roger Rabbit because Spielberg won't agree with him. Then Spielberg does DreamWorks, so there's no way that he's going to let him do anything with Roger.
All right.
Even though they still tried to develop a sequel, there was like 2 or 3 different ideas they did for a sequel that didn't go anywhere because Spielberg wouldn't let him do it. And Roger Rabbit, he was considered he got added in with Mickey and all them. They did a 20th or a 50th anniversary for Mickey Mouse, or 60th, I think it was. 60th. They did a special, and Roger was like his little buddy in there, little sidekick. And that was the last time. Well, he was in that Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers movie on Disney Plus, but we don't see Roger anymore, and that's why, because of the feud.
Which, by the way, something that we might want to mention here, I think you've mentioned it before, the original Steamboat Willie, right? He's now fair game.
Yep.
Do what you want.
Original
public domain.
There, yep. And they're going to just start. They're all just going to start going out in the public domain now, and I hope they don't change the law again, because now eventually we'll get to Song of the South. Be almost 20 years, but we're going to get to it.
Yes.
That's the only way you'll probably ever get to see it, if things don't change the way they are.
Wow, good point.
And Disney is still trying to enforce the copyright of Steamboat Willie. I read that in an article that they went after people that were trying to monetize it. And now they're claiming they own the copyright on the soundtrack. And it should both expire at the same time because they were filmed at the same time.
Right.
So what goes on over at the animation studio at Disney, they put out Oliver and Company, and that goes up against Don Bluth again. They do The Land Before Time with the dinosaurs. And that one had a lot of stuff cut out of it because it was too dark, Land Before Time. And Oliver and Company beats Land Before Time. And we only remember the animated films from this time, but a lot of the films that Eisner and Katzberg were making live action, they were successful at that time, but no one remembers them. The ones that were under for the adults, Touchstone Pictures and all that. Mm-hmm. I think Beverly Hills Cop, those films were some of theirs.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Then some of the films they start doing under Walt Disney Pictures, they start going back to the roots, doing family films. They do Shipwrecked, White Fang, Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken, Three Musketeers, The Mighty Ducks. That one's kind of come back again. Mm-hmm. They bought a team because of that, and it was a real team for a while.
Well, it still is the Anaheim Mighty Ducks. Oh, but they sold it, I believe.
Yeah, they sold it. Right? I don't know if it's still called the Mighty Ducks.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they might just be the Ducks now. I forget now.
They right? For a while they had the Angels too for the baseball, because they did Angels in the Outfield, and they did Huckleberry Finn, Cool Runnings. They did a version of the Jungle Book live action on TV. They did some Davy Crockett sequels, so they were still trying to respect the legacy of what Walt had set up, even though it was time was moving on. Now, some of the films from Touchstone Pictures, they started doing family films with Edge. One of the surprise hits was Ernest Goes to Camp.
Oh, yeah.
That was the first film with Ernest.
I love Jim Varney.
Yeah. Oh, it was sad. He passed away. I think he was 49.
Yeah.
He was a lot more than Ernest, but that's the character that everyone remembers him for. And that was such a surprise hit. They had to do a sequel. They had to get one right into production. They had this script done by the people that ended up doing that 70s show on Third Rock from the Sun. And it became Ernest Saves Christmas. It wasn't written as an Ernest movie. It was written as just a Christmas movie. That's the first movie where you have the idea of Santa Claus being not one guy, but a dynasty where they replaced him. And that was the first film that Disney filmed at their Florida studio. And people knock it because it's an earnest movie, but there's a lot going on in that film where they talk about content of family films and other films, and it's interesting on that.
What year? So that was Ernest Goes to Camp.
I think that was 86 or 87, and Ernest Saves Christmas was 88.
Okay, so the Ernest Goes to Camp. Here's a fun fact. First of all, how well did it do? Because I have an anecdotal comment.
I don't know offhand, but it did well enough that it became a 4-picture deal.
Oh my goodness. Okay, because Ernest Goes to Camp. So let's see. Hold on a second. I got to test my memory here. Ernest Goes to Camp comes out May 22nd, 1987. Hang on a second. Hang on. 22nd, 1987. Okay. All right. So anyway, I don't know. I just remember that my mom went to go see a movie in one theater. I was trying to remember which one she went to go see. It couldn't have been that. And I went to go see Ernest Goes to Camp in another. And I was the only person in the theater. And so I literally just ran around the theater. I was like 10 years old. 11 years old, run around the theater just because I could. But I was just curious how it did at the box office, considering I was the only one.
He always did that thing where he checked the toilet and go with his jaw. That was what I always remember about it. I haven't seen it in years. Yeah.
He's so good. I loved him. Anyway, continue. Sorry.
He did like 30 Ernest movies after that, but they weren't all Disney.
Let's see. Box office take. Let's see how it did. Hang on. Let me just check here. Let's, So it had a... Okay, so a total gross of $23.5 million.
That probably would have been like 100 million today or 200 million.
Right. And so it, I'm just trying to find out what its budget was here.
It was probably not very much. It was filmed right there in Tennessee.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Budget 3.5, box office 23.5. Awesome.
He always had the same people make all those films. It was always the same guys that did the commercials. Other touchstone picture I was going to mention was Sister Act with Whoopi Goldberg, probably the only movie she made that I care for. And that was a touchstone picture.
Mm-hmm.
And because of all these films, Eisner starts other studios up, other aliases. Besides Touchstone Pictures, he has Hollywood Pictures, Caravan Pictures, Dimension Pictures. Then he buys Miramax, and the Weinsteins work for him. Harvey Weinstein.
Oh boy.
That's where this all started. So we got all that going on. And at the time you would have every year, they'd have the Christmas parade, the Easter parade, the 4th of July parade. They would show these on network TV for 2-hour specials. You'd have Regis Philbin, and he'd show what's going on through the whole Disney company. Those, they don't do anything like that anymore. But around this time is Jim Henson wants to sell his stuff off to Disney. And how he knows Eisner is Eisner greenlit the 2 pilots for the Muppet Show. And so he gets into talks with Eisner, and they decide they're going to merge. And they think Eisner thinks this is a great idea because Jim Henson's probably the closest figure there's ever been to a Walt Disney figure.
Wow,
after Walt. Because he just was always in all these different creative things. And Henson agrees to give him everything, but except the Sesame Street Muppets. See, that's its own thing. So what does Disney do? They call this merger Operation Big Bird. That kind of ticks Henson off. Jeffrey Katzenberg's very abrasive with Henson, and that turns him off. And what Henson was going to do was work in the Imagineering as well as the parks. He would have basically did what John Lasseter ended up doing later. This was like the proto deal for this. And they developed some ride ideas for Henson. They were going to when they did the MGM the studios. It's now called Hollywood Studios. It was called MGM Studios. They licensed the MGM name. There was going to be a whole section that was a Muppet Land there, and what the ride that's in the studios there, they tore it down. It had all the MGM film scenes in it. It was called the Great Movie Ride. It was in the Chinese theater. They were going to do a Muppet. They were going to do a Muppet parody of this, where it was the Muppet Movie Ride. And the Muppets were going to teach you how they made movies, but all the information was wrong. And you'd ride in you'd ride in the car and you'd see the Muppets doing like they do a scene from Peter Pan, and they'd have you go behind the curtain, and there were the rats holding up. They were trying to hold Miss Piggy up as Tinkerbell, and they were all struggling because of how heavy she is.
That would have been awesome, man.
Well, the most awesome part is when you were riding along, Statler and Waldorf, the two guys from the balcony, they'd be in golf carts, that you'd catch up with them, and they'd be making fun of what you'd just seen. And I wish
that happen.
Well, because Jim Henson died.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Fair.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
They were going to do a scene from Frankenstein where it's Bunsen and Beaker, but Beaker's Frankenstein, and it's a giant beaker. And people don't know these classic characters anymore. And what ends up happening is the reason they don't merge is because Jim Henson dies, and he dies of it's almost like a flu infection. Yeah. He never went to the hospital. He grew up a Christian Scientist, and they always said that was why, but I don't know for sure.
Because I think he developed pneumonia. I'm not sure.
They said if he'd went to the hospital just 6 hours earlier, he would have lived.
Yeah, I've heard that.
I remember when he died.
Me too, man.
And what they don't end up merging because Katzenberg's just so aggressive with the family after he died. Eisner's aggressive with the family. They want to do a TV special about Jim Henson, and the family's in mourning, and they don't really want to deal with that, but they end up doing it. But they end up not doing it. Eisner lowers what they were going to pay for it because they wanted to get Jim Henson for 15 years to be the executive at Disney, the creative officer. And because Henson's gone, they just want to buy up all the stuff. And the family turns it down. They end up making two films with the Muppets. Disney does. The Muppet Christmas Carol, Muppet Treasure Island. That was the first time they ever did an adaptation. That's pretty much all they've ever done since then. They finally started getting into other things, but Eisner ends up buying the Muppets in the early 2000s because he feels like because he greenlit them, he wants to own them. But ever since then, they haven't really done anything with them. They did that one reboot movie that was all right, but they did like a reality TV show that was really terrible. And I can't even think of what they did with them last. It's just they have all these characters sitting there. They're popular characters when we were growing up, and people don't even remember them as they were because they've been out of the public eye for so long. And other things that they build at the parks there, they do Splash Mountain, they do Star Tours with Star Wars.
Yeah, read that comment. I think you need to absorb that comment. That's a great point, Katie. Well, you should program with an AI so that your Disney history, could be accessed. Either that, or they could just watch these videos.
I saw they did that documentary on ABC about the 100th anniversary of Disney, and they have a museum thing going around, and they have a CGI AI Walt. Like it looks creepy.
I bet
it doesn't. You can tell that it's CGI. And so they start with the theme parks. They start bringing in bigger. They bring in other creatives to do rides. They do Star Tours. They do Captain EO with Michael Jackson, Francis Ford Coppola. Star Tours with George Lucas. Now the other big Disney film that happens around this time is Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And no one expected that to be a big hit. Now, when it started, it was started as a Disney film when they were doing all that goofy stuff in the 70s. They were going to call it Teeny Weenies.
Teeny Weenies.
Yeah.
Hang on a second. Let me get
when they were going to do this, they had the sequel was going to be called The Big Baby. And they end up calling it Honey, I Blew Up the Kid. Well, see, and nobody remembers that film, but that was a very successful film in 1989. And that was
right. That was great.
That part was originally going to go to John Candy, but he didn't want to do it.
What?
And John Candy was given the part in Ghostbusters and didn't want to do it. And then he got Rick Moranis. So it was like Rick Moranis replaces John Candy all the time.
What in the world, man? What's his deal? Okay.
Huh. And then Disney gets offered to buy Pixar, and they turn it down. And Steve Jobs buys it.
Okay.
But then they contract Pixar to develop a system where they can paint their animation drawings and not use cells anymore. And they start putting out the animated features onto VHS releases. And they have all these anniversary specials about Snow White, Disneyland, and Mickey Mouse. They try to make these into an event every time there's something that happens.
I often think about a buddy of mine who I should send him these. I'm going to start calling them This is almost like a college course in Disney history for
I
me.
was thinking about that the other day. This is like a Hillsdale's course.
Professor McCray. So he bought all of those Disney movies when they would be released on VHS, like you said. Are those worth anything these days? Or?
Some people say they are and some don't, but VHS rots. So I still have all mine I have mine in a box. So I noticed some of them get like a powdery surface to them. And these are the ones I recorded.
Wait a minute. I've got all my, there's not many Falcons memories from back in the day, and they're on VHS.
You better convert them over.
I better convert them. Okay. Well, now you got the internet and you got YouTube. I was saving these things before there was YouTube.
What I've been doing is whenever anyone posts some of this stuff I had on VHS, I download it off of YouTube. So I've got it archived and I keep it in a couple different places because they won't ever release it officially. If they did, I would buy it. But they say even DVDs rot eventually too.
Yeah. Gosh. Okay.
So we've got a picture of this guy, Howard Ashman, with Alan Menken. He's the next important figure because they hire him. They want him to work at Disney. He did a musical called Little Shop of Horrors.
Okay. And I don't see a Howard Ashman picture.
It might be under Alan Menken and Howard Ashman. I don't know. Okay. Maybe it's under their last names. But they're both together in it. It's two men. Howard Ashman he understands why animated films were musicals, because up until this time people have forgotten why. They just put Howard Ashman's the one on the left, Alan Menken's on the right. Okay. Now when they talk about him, they try to mention that he was gay, and they want to go woke with all this stuff, but I don't think he was woke, because you can look at everything he did, and it was always about the story and character. It wasn't about inserting anything into the films, any agenda, political agenda, any indoctrination. And when he does Little Shop of Horrors, what that story's about is it's Rick Moranis again. He's this dweeby little guy. He finds this plant that's a man-eating plant, and it talks him into start killing people, and ends up devouring him, and then devours the whole country. And we're going to link to it. The original ending, it devours the whole country, whole United States. And it even has it's just like all these groups that the left is aligning with now, because eventually they'll get devoured by these groups. And I don't know if that's what his intent was, but you can read that into it. But he understands with the reason the template of a musical was set up with animation is because animation is expensive, and it's a fast way to do a story and characters to have song. So Snow White was a musical, and he regenerates the animation department with this concept, and they do The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin. And he was offered to work in live action, but he wanted to do animation. And at the time, nobody believed in animation. It was just this, they thought they were going to lose money, just this thing off to the side they had to do because Roy wanted him to keep it going. And he rejuvenates it, and he looks at what they're doing in Little Mermaid. The original concept of Little Mermaid, they were going to have this crab that was a tutor, that was a British crab. His name was Clarence. Well, he wanted to make him a Jamaican crab so he could get calypso music into it. So that became Sebastian. And it was his idea to put the enchanted objects into Beauty and the Beast. The story was they could never get through the second act because it's just a guy asking a woman to marry him through the whole second act. And he invents this thing with the enchanted objects, and that he gives them personalities and the songs and everything. And that got compared to a Broadway show. And when after Little Mermaid, he got put on Beauty and the Beast after Little Mermaid, but what he wanted to do was Aladdin. And he developed Aladdin as its own story. He was the one that started it. And it was developed to be one of those 1940s buddy pictures like you see with Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. You have all that Arab visual. And the original concept for it was the genie was going to be a Fats Waller, Cab Calloway type, kind of like the Fleischer cartoons. And you're kind of glad they didn't do that because they would. And original story for Aladdin, in the week that we missed, I came upon his original treatment. I'd never seen this before, but I had the songs. The original treatment, Aladdin and Jasmine aren't the couple. Aladdin there's a girl next door that lives in the streets with him that's a Judy Garland type, and that's who he ends up with. He has three friends. Bab Cacklemore, Aladdin, and Cassim is the song they sing, and they put the friends back in the Broadway show they did, but they didn't put the other friends.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
But that was a story that got rejected because they wanted it had to be a princess story. And the original concept of Princess Jasmine, she was a stuck-up, snobby, spoiled prince, and her dad spoiled her, and she ends up with one of Aladdin's friends at the end of the treatment. And he wrote a whole score for this, and some of the songs got used in it. And the Arabian Nights song got changed. That's a song that started out the film, and there was a line in there where they cut off your ear if they don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home. And that was done as a satire. Well, by the time it got to home video, it became it's flat and immense, the heat is intense. Well, there was also, that song was a lot longer before it had like 5 or 6 verses. And in the demo, there's also a line in there, they hack off your lips if they don't like your smile. And I said this to someone that worked on Aladdin recently. We're going to get, if things keep going the way they are, we're going to get to the point where that film is going to be Song of the South for this generation. They're going to ban it because they're saying it's offensive. They're already doing that with Pocahontas. And Howard Ashman, he has AIDS through all this. Nobody knows. Just the inner circle. And he ends up having the animation. When he finally tells Disney, they have all the animation people come to his house in New York to work with him to finish Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin. He dies in the middle of Aladdin. He doesn't finish it. He finishes Beauty and the Beast, but he never sees the final film. But when he died, Roy Jr. said that he was another person like Walt. And I think it's important to point out he was a person that just happened to be gay. He didn't define everything that he did that way. Because all the relationships in the films and everything, it's always traditional relationships. Right. It's not like now where they make everything that defines everything.
But the woke crowd is trying to claim him, is what you're saying.
And yeah, they are. And I found a YouTube channel where they try to tie all the stuff in his films to queerness, is what they call it. The person that started this channel, they started out normal, and then they go gay, and then they go bi, and then they go or they go bi, then they go to the gay, then they
the person that hosts this channel,
the host of this channel. And in the final episode, they have done the full sexual transition, and they're going in for bottom surgery.
So they're twisting. They're trying to find. I'm not familiar with this channel.
Well, I just stumbled on it, and because I was looking for a clip of Howard Ashman to show, because there's footage of him where he talks about how he grew up with all these Walt Disney films, and he wanted to create something that felt like those films, but it was for this generation. So he really respected the past of those films. He was trying to keep it going, and it was really because of him that it kept going. And
what year did he die?
91, I think it was March 91.
Okay.
And he's the one that brought Alan Menken, and Alan Menken carries it on doing all these songs with other songwriters. But Howard Ashman, he's really the guy that rejuvenated the animation department with getting them to understand why the films were made under Walt the way they were. And he doesn't get credit for that. They just want to focus on his lifestyle.
I got you.
And that's a disservice to him and what he did, I think. But one other thing that he did that no one remembers is they did an anti-drug cartoon in the vein of Roger Rabbit, where all the Saturday morning cartoon show characters, they were all on this cartoon together, and they did a song in it that he wrote about not taking drugs. It was done for the Bush administration. And we'll link to this too. It's called Cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue. Wow. And you have even Alpha's in this. It's got Alf and Bugs Bunny and the Muppet Babies, the Smurfs.
Muppet Babies.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, no, that was not good.
I got a good comment on that. The Muppet Babies, they were talking to Jim Henson about licensing them for diapers, and Jim Henson's like, "You want to pay me to have kids crap on my name?" And he just signed it.
I mean, when you put it like that, yeah.
Well, Jim Henson's also the guy who made a career sticking his hand up a frog's rear end.
That's true. That's fair. Okay.
The only person. Now at this time, this is when Spielberg, he gets into animation too. He does Tiny Toon Adventures, Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain, creates Amblimation, does Balto, does a sequel to American Tail, he does We're Back, a Dinosaur Story. Now the reason they did animation at the MGM Studios in Florida is so they didn't have to pay the union rates. I'm almost to the middle here, we can cut off. They set the MGM Studios for animation to do commercial work. And then they decided to start doing work on the features because they didn't have to pay the union rates down there. And that's why then they started doing whole features down in Florida. And They're
Smart.
always having to cut things out of these films because there wasn't enough animators to do it. They wanted to keep the money down. Little Mermaid, they were going to have the shark chase Ariel when she goes to this ship where they're having the wedding. They were going to have a scene where the shark swims after her, and they end up blowing up the shark, and like in Jaws, and all the stuff that the shark ate in the beginning, it goes. You see that? Yeah. And at this time they also have the Disney Adventures magazine that's keeping track of all the things. I mean, people don't realize how this Disney thing is started building up. Where when you were our age, you were always, these were events, and you were always following what was going on. Mm-hmm. And they make the movie Dick Tracy. It's a very innovative movie that was in response to Batman. You remember Batman with Michael Keaton? Mm-hmm. That didn't do very well. Dick Tracy. Eisner declares the 90s is going to be the Disney decade, and they also set up in all the theme parks these machines where you can vote for who the most important person of the 20th century was. Well, everybody starts voting for Hitler and Walt Disney, and that's kind of embarrassing. Then there was this thing with Imagineers when the lunch break, they would start voting for one of the Imagineers, and it got to where he was the number one guy. The numbers were so high you could never overtake it, and they couldn't fix it, so they just pulled the machines out, and they didn't. They were going to announce this on the millennium in 2000. These were all going to be there through 10 years, the whole decade. And they just pulled them out and
unceremoniously. Yeah, we're going to move on from this.
Yeah. But there's all kinds of stories like that. And now Beauty and the Beast, it becomes the first animated feature to be nominated for Best Picture. And that's important because after that happens, Eisner and Katzenberg try to orchestrate a film to win Best Picture. So they start changing the films. Now,
see, you gotta let it happen organically.
Yeah, and that was a great film, Beauty and the Beast. I remember seeing that in the theater. I remember that was probably the first one of the new ones I saw in a theater. I saw Little Mermaid in a drive-in, and
cool.
They can't do anything with the other films till Pocahontas. We'll get to that. And they've also set up a studio in France that's going to do animated features of the Disney Afternoon characters. They do DuckTales movie and a Goofy movie, and those aren't as successful, so they quit doing those, and they put them in feature animation. Now they also do a film called The Rocketeer, and that was supposed to be their Disney version of Indiana Jones, and the director of that got to do Captain America because he directed The Rocketeer, and it's not a bad film. It just never found an audience because it had Walt Disney Pictures on it, and that film, they did a version of it on television where there's no profanity. And that's kind of where I learned, why do you have to have all this profanity in a film if you can tell the same story without it? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to give you another little factoid about Aladdin here. Well, I found this out on that YouTube channel. They have a clip of Gavin McInnes, and he said the Proud Boys were named after a song that was cut from Aladdin called Proud of Your Boy that's become a gay anthem. Because he was kind of sticking it to him. And there's footage of Gavin McInnes saying this, so... It must be. He said that he said that this kid was singing it at a high school thing, and he's like, "Oh, the parents are not proud of their boy," so he named his group the Proud Boys. And this person just went nuts that he did that. And another thing about Aladdin is the animator who did the genie, he made it so in his mind the genie was Jewish, Aladdin was a Muslim, and they were friends. It was a buddy movie. And that was just that was like in his own mind. But if you look at that film, that is kind of there. Cool. And Katzenberg there's some of the jokes in Aladdin where Robin Williams has the gay lisp. He was more worried about offending gay people than worried about offending Arabs in that film. He does the thing where he's like a tailor. He has the lisp, and they end up having a falling out with Robin Williams because Robin Williams' friend makes the movie Toys, and he doesn't want two films competing with each other, so he doesn't want any mention of Robin Williams being in this movie. So they end up making a deal. They can only mention it in 25% of the marketing. So they have the poster for Aladdin that comes out. It's the genie's towering over the whole cast, and he's holding the whole cast. So Robin Williams sees this and he gets mad, and then Katzenberg's like, well, he's only in 25% of the poster. So then what really ticks off Robin Williams is he's out in California, he sees his bus go by, just the genie's on the bus. And Katzenberg tells him, well, he's only on 25% of the buses. So he never works for Disney. He says, I'm never working for you again. That's it. He does end up working for Disney after Katzenberg leaves. But this is what I mean. Katzenberg kind of does things like this. He's got a reputation for being a very aggressive guy like that. But he must not have been a bad guy, because a lot of people went to work with him at DreamWorks. And
DreamWorks.
Katzenberg, while he's at Disney, he decides to do 2 films a year. So they cut the staff in half. So that after Aladdin, all the people, half are on one film, half are on another film. So you've already divided yourself, and they start putting films in production before they're ready, and then it costs more money to fix them. And we're going to get into DreamWorks. Probably have to wait till next time. But another thing that goes on at this time is The Nightmare Before Christmas. They do that with Tim Burton. And they also do the film Hocus Pocus. And these films were not successful when they came out, because they were not where America was at that time. They rejected these films as being inappropriate for kids. And now they're considered classics. But I'll just tell you something that was in Hocus Pocus that isn't now. If you watch that film, the fat witch, she's always barking through the film. I'll tell you why she was barking in the original film. And they shot this. Her father was a dog. The mother turned into a dog and got pregnant and had this witch. And that's why she's barking. She's part dog. And they cut that out of the movie. And,
gosh. Okay.
But now, if they made that now, it would be in the movie. They made that sequel where now they bash the Christians. And there were things in that movie. It's a very well done film for establishing a mythology with your own original characters. And one of the things that happened that's cut out now, or not as subtle, or it's more subtle, is when the kid is running through the woods at the beginning, he was wearing a cross and it fell off, and that's how they could turn him into a cat. He lost his cross.
Oh, interesting.
And they didn't have the close up on there because they became anti-Christian there.
Interesting.
And, now we can either go on to Pocahontas, or we can start with Pocahontas next time. I see we're.
Well, what do you think here? What you make the call? You want to just pick it up with Pocahontas, because I believe I've heard you say off air before that's kind of where
it changed.
That's where. Okay, so we'll start there next time as the beginning of, I don't want to say the beginning of the end, but beginning of the real transformation of Disney. Is that fair?
Yeah, because this is where they did the Lion King come out, then Katzenberg leaves, and this is where Frank Wells died. Katzenberg leaves. DreamWorks is formed. This is where this all starts. Is about that time. Pocahontas was a transitional film. We didn't mention the Lion King. It was the biggest film ever done with the animation up to that time. I never really liked Lion King. I'm like the minority.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah, man.
I'm not into animal films. I could never get into them. I could get into Lady and the Tramp, but I like Bambi. I see it as a work of art. It's a great work of art, but I could never get Lion King. I went to see it when it came out. It just never did anything for me.
Wow. Okay. All right.
I haven't seen it in a long time, so maybe that would be different now. But
give it another shot.
Yeah, it's not that I hate the film. I always think of Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast. Those are the big films. But the Lion King was the first one where they divided the animators up.
I see. All right. Very interesting.
Maybe that's part of it. Yeah.
Maybe that is. Okay. Man,
we have questions.
Yeah, we covered a lot of years there, Ed.
We almost went 30 years. Well, thank you.
So we'll pick it up in 1995.
Yeah, 95-ish, because Toy Story, that was the year of Toy Story as well. So we'll be getting into Pixar.
That's a good question from Katie. When is next time?
Next Saturday is, as long as the Disney Mafia doesn't shut my power off. And
it's kind of the CIA to not eliminate your internet access today. So so a week from today at 11 a.m. Eastern will be part 4. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, please go back and check those out. And then so that's January 27th, and then on Saturday, February 3rd, we will do part 5 at 11 a.m. Eastern.
That's Jill Chill's birthday.
Jill Chill's birthday is February 3rd. So
I just assigned it.
Okay, I like that. So Ed and I are still trying to figure out all of the dates. As soon as we have all of the dates confirmed, as far out as that goes, we will make sure that you guys have that, so you can put it on your calendar and set reminders and all sorts of good stuff, so that you can be a part of the live stream. Don't forget, you can share this with your family and friends that might have an interest in Disney and the history involved there, and it's just vast. obviously, as Ed has laid out here.
I told you we could do these as long as you want to do them. There's all
I'm telling
kinds
you,
of
man, you have the information, that's for sure. So we'll figure out when all the dates will be, but do make plans, everybody, for the next 2 Saturdays for a live stream. And so that's in addition to the Friday live stream that we do at 2 o'clock Eastern. We have those scheduled coming up as well, January 26th and February 2nd. Ed, give us a tease for next week. We're gonna pick it up in the mid 90s, and that's when Disney just starts the nosedive.
We're gonna go up to however long it takes. We're gonna get up to the present day, and we're going to finally get to that what Snow White is really about. We teased that in the first one.
That's right. That's right.
Now, that's part of the story. What is the original Walt Disney Snow White? Why they have it wrong when they're trying to say that the prince is creepy and stalking Snow White and all this stuff.
Okay, cool. Going to debunk the record straight. That's the great thing about Ed. He sets the record straight. Okay, Ed, everybody, thank you all so much. Again, we'll join you again Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, and then back here Saturday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern with Ed in Disney, Saving Disney History, Part 4. Thanks, everybody. It was a pleasure. I appreciate it so much. Y'all have a great weekend.
See you later.